welcome everyone to my interview with Sangye Khandro. Sangye Khandro has been a Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana practitioner since 1971, and she is also a translator of the Dharma into English since 1976. She has established many Dharma centers in the United States and has served as a translator for many prominent masters in all the major lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. She has been and still is the spiritual companion of the Venerable Gyatro Rinpoche, and for nearly 30 years has continued to serve in his centers. Her root teacher is His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche, and with whom she studied and practiced for many years. Sangye Khandro recently founded a translation group called the Light of Beratsana. So Sangye, welcome to this interview. Thank you for accepting to be here today. These interviews that I'm doing, Sangye, I'm interviewing people that I've met in my Dharma life, people that inspire me in Dharma, and people that I can learn from. And I'm turning to these YouTube videos to take advantage of this technology to just, widen the scope to reach more people, because the Dharma, from my perspective, and I know you'll believe, is the most precious thing. And these are very important times we are in, and anything that we can do to connect even one person to the Dharma, I think is a really wonderful accomplishment or motivation. And I know you have this same motivation as me. These interviews are not about ego or stuff like that, but it's just what the Dharma has taught us and how we can share that with others. So in these interviews, I'm interested in two things. Of course, I'm interested in what people know, in what you know, and what you've learned from your life in the Dharma. But I'm also, and maybe there's a slight bias here, more interested, or just as interested in who you are, and who you are as a person. So who we are as a person, I think we can relate that to the principle of biography. I myself have loved to read biographies. I find them sources of inspiration, sources of connection, sources of insight and learning. So I'm wondering if it would be okay to ask you today to share with our viewers one or two parts of your Dharma life that really stand out for you as important, maybe aha moments or clarifying moments or whatever they were. If we could start with that, that would be good.
Okay, thank you. That's a beautiful introduction. And, there are so many aha moments that it's hard to even choose which one would be more important to share than the next. I remember writing down in my diary every day so excitedly when I was in India as a young woman for the first 6 years of learning Buddhism, all the things that happened that day, because they were just so exciting and memorable. And I still have those diaries, and I look back and I'm amazed at how exciting it all was. So, very special. But when I look back at my life, I'd say like the first moment that sticks in my mind right now in terms of kind of a spiritual awakening or a rekindling was at the funeral of my grandmother. And I was probably about 14, and it was an open casket funeral. And I just can remember standing there and looking at her corpse in the casket and wondering about death and what was actually really taking place. I was raised a Mormon and went to church all my life as a young child, and I actually visited the Mormon temples. I was baptized for the dead. I was quite involved with the church. So I had strong spiritual inclinations my whole life. But at this point in time, I had a rekindling of some other source that I needed to draw from, because I really actually was unable to accept the theory of the church that I was in. It just was not enough for me. And so I began to wonder and contemplate, and that burning need to know, to have some other answers about what really happens when we die, and where do people really go, and so on and so forth. So that led me to my pilgrimage to India. And it was there that I began to meet the Tibetan refugees in the early years, when they were pretty raw and rugged and rough when they first came out. And I was up in the hill station known as Dharamsala, which is where the Holiness the Dalai Lama still lives his home. And at that time, another strong moment for me was when I somehow made it up to the huts of these yogi and yogini practitioners to offer a scroll that I had brought from the rice paper scroll of a deity that I had brought from Thailand. And I didn't know which deity it was, but I knew it was a female. And it was Dakini Day. And I was told that these yogis and yoginis would be practicing up there in the hills above Dharamsala. And so I went there and I walked in the room, and there they were with their chut drums and their thigh-bone trumpets. And they were chanting these beautiful melodies, the haunting melodies of the Truma sadhana, which I had no idea it was Truma. Truma is the wrathful Great Mother, Dakini practice that is a Karma revelation of the Great Vision Rinpa. And so I had no idea what this was, but I entered the room, and I had the scroll, and I took it up to the Master of Ceremonies, who was Nakpa Yeshe Dorje, who had been well known as the Dalai Lama's weatherman. And I handed it to him, and it was a scroll of Truma Nakmo. So it was really an amazing moment.
Ooh, that is truly... That's the beginning.
That was the beginning of Truma as my main path and practice, and also as my entrance into the Nyingmapa school, the earlier translation school. Prior to that, I had been studying in the Daily Trust tradition, and I still, of course, honor that and my main refuge teacher and all the introductions that I was given. At that moment, my life changed.
Yeah. I think that as human beings, of course, we have many dimensions to our existence, and it's really clear that in the spiritual dimension, the Dakini Truma is your connection, and that story is a phenomenal story and so clear. But at the same time, I know that there's the more mundane realm where we live, which is also part of the Dharma. And so at that time then, how was your experience as a woman coming into this Tibetan Buddhism? And especially, I don't know whether in India or in the West, but what kind of experiences did you have there at that level?
I had many experiences at that level, and it was very difficult and sad for me, because obviously I noticed that when you tried to go into the temples to participate in ceremonies, you had to sit in the back where the nuns were, the female ordained practitioners, and that all the male practitioners, male ordained, were in the front. And I also noticed another time, which was pivotal. The Holiness Dalai Lama was in his temple and doing a ceremony, and many of us were circumambulating around outside and trying to find a seat so that we could, sit there and receive the blessing. And at a certain point, um, everyone was asked to go out, including all the nuns, except for a host of bhikshu males who were there in the ceremony. And not only were we all asked to go out, but all the doors and windows were closed. And so we were just kind of shut out from the experience. And at that time, I just felt so sad, not just only for myself, but for everyone else, all the other women, who had been shut out too. And I didn't know. I didn't understand what was going on. I'm sure there was a reason. Later, I think I found out that the Nature Oracle was coming in. There was going to be something going on with the Oracle going into trance, which was very secretive in those years. And maybe women weren't allowed to witness it. I don't know. But I just felt sad, and I cried, and I made many prayers as I continued to circumambulate. But I didn't pray to be reborn as a male, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I prayed that somehow there could always be a sense of equanimity, and that female practitioners could have the confidence to know that they have, the same opportunity to achieve liberation as any other human being. Now, I tell the story just because it was an outer experience, but I would have to say that with my teachers at that time, I was always treated equally. And so I never really felt any discrimination. And in fact, it was kind of amazing. My Gelugpa teacher, the Geshe that I took refuge with and that I was studying with at the time, he treated me just like any other male monk. He gave me equal opportunities from the beginning. And a lot of times the other nuns and the Tibetan women would kind of look in astonishment. But I came to notice that their lack of opportunity oftentimes had to do with cultural inadequacy, and that it was really culturally based. It wasn't spiritually based. And so I could come in there from another culture, and I didn't have those predispositions. And yet I had the spiritual inclination and confidence, and so I was able to push through that or move through that. And the teachers who are on a higher level of realization just moved right along with me. It didn't matter that I was a female. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so I think a lot of the problems that we see in this have to do with the cultural issues. And they are very biased. And there's a lot of problems there that exist to this day. Although it's much better than it was, still the problems exist in the minds of the females in those cultures.
Yes. It's very good to hear from someone such as yourself that you know embedded right in the heart of Tibetan Buddhism connecting with Westerners, so that was in that period of time, and to hear that your personal experience was that you were not held to be inferior. It was that, and to see that it was a cultural situation and not really part of the Dharma teachings at all. Nowadays, of course, what we call the feminine principle is very central to Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism, and also we see this feminine principle defined as a sublime knowledge or the basic space of truth, and we see in the world of Vajrayana how this principle displays itself in visionary levels such as deities, and also I think very uniquely in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that this very high level of realization or enlightenment is also held to manifest in the human level. and particularly also just in the embodiment of the feminine gender, so that there are even some tantric practices that one should circumambulate or show reverence to all women because they have a special connection through their subtle energy bodies to the aspect of enlightenment. And so this principle of the feminine, then, I think in Vajrayana Buddhism, what is so beautiful is that it has so many levels of application. And nowadays, in terms of the modern world, in terms of leadership, things like that, there are many astute, scientists and leadership gurus that are calling for a return to what they call feminine values of leadership, such things as creating connection, creating nourishing containers for activities and things like that. So I'm wondering, in your life, if since you are so spiritually close to the enlightened feminine, then do you draw upon that for the nuts and bolts of your daily life, or navigating your leadership role in, for example, light of Bharatsana or anything like that?
Well, as a practitioner of the wisdom Dakini, of course I draw from the essence of Prajna, the Prajna Paramita, of the Yun Chenmo, the Great Mother, which is the source or the birthplace of all the Buddhas. And that is, of course, the realization of the fundamental nature of truth, or emptiness. But that emptiness possesses wisdom and enlightenment manifestations of form. And so I am, trying to be aware of this view of
Yes.
The evenness of the empty nature of all compounded phenomena and the pure nature, which are inseparable. And so that's what motivates me to try to benefit others with that view in mind, and then to use whatever methods are appropriate and in harmony with the needs of others to help them to find the spiritual path. So, I would have to say I do draw from that, the view of the prajna aspect, which of course is inseparable with the upaya, or the method. But mainly you have to have some kind of view that is the basis for what we're doing, right? I mean, everything emerges from that.
Right.
And so that's the essence of the feminine principle. But that the feminine principle is inseparable with the male principle. It's just that oftentimes you hear it said that if one were to ask which is more crucial or which carries more import in terms of practice, then clearly it is the feminine principle, because if you don't understand the basic fundamental nature of the source of all phenomena, which is emptiness, how are you going to really understand the phenomena if you don't know its source? And so that's the guiding principle in my life, for sure.
I think it's really important what you have just explained and presented, because there are so many misconceptions in the general field out there about the feminine principle. And unfortunately, it's causing more delusion or more mistakes in many cases. And that's something that maybe you have seen, or I'm very sad to see that. So I really, want to be able to clarify that for Dharma practitioners.
Yes.
That it's for, and I know exactly this quotation that you have from the Tantras is also quoted by His Holiness Duja Rinpoche in the Khandro Tutik, that when it comes to practice, the feminine principle is exalted. And in other places, like just exactly as you said, I think it's so people want viewers to understand that basically. That's the ground level. Then I'm also wanting to ask perhaps one last thing of you, which is of the female heroines in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And of course I would include Mandarava, who was from India and never really went to Tibet, but still very much part of that tradition. So at that level of those archetypal female heroines, if you have one that particularly speaks to you, maybe at any time in your life or maybe right now.
I would say Mandarava, as you brought her up.
Yes, because you have translated her life story. And this was one of the very first life stories of female heroines, spiritual heroines that I had ever read. And so I really appreciate that you translated the lives and liberation of the Princess Mandarava. And wondering, did this come about through a personal story that you chose this, or?
It was requested by a group that I do this translation, and Lama Chunam worked on it with me. It was actually the very first translation that we worked on together. Mm-hmm. So it was a pleasure because it's very hard to know about these places and names, if you don't have a Tibetan there to help guide you through it. It was just loaded with those kinds of obscure, that kind of obscure information that I was requested to do it, and then I was delighted because I just finished translating for and touring with Kusum Lingpa, and he had an affinity with Mandarava and had given several transmissions and teachings and always brought her up and in fact had revealed a little paramount about her during the course of traveling with him. And so let's say the energy was mature for Mandarava's life story to come out into English. And Mandarava was Guru Padma Sambhava's, sometimes she's referred to as his first wife. But we can't know historically if she was his first consort or not. But there may have been others that were not as famous. But she is the first famous one that we know of. Mm-hmm. And I was always more interested to learn about Mandarava since I had been in Nepal many years before this and went to the Madhutita cave, yes, where Padmasambhava and Mandarava both achieved the state of immortal Vidyadhara. And while I was there, I had experiences that caused me to want to pursue knowing more about them.
So Mandarava still continues as a burning flame in your life today.
Yes,
that's wonderful.
Great inspiration.
Thank you, Sangye. That's really, really beautiful and very wonderful. Thank you so much for this interview, and I look forward to seeing you person to person, I hope, as soon as possible.
You too.
Okay. Thank you. Tashitale.
Tashitale.
Bye-bye.